Live. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Martin. I'm part of the team here at Reedsy. I'm really glad to bring you online to a very special edition of Reedsy Live. This is normally the ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. But today we're having a very special edition. It is a celebration, a launch party, if you will, for the third volume of our literary magazine, Prompted. These are a collection of stories of winners of our weekly writing prompts contest. We're going to bring on some of the winning writers to read some excerpts from their stories, talk about their process. It's just an opportunity for us to all hang out and find out a bit more about the writing process and to meet fellow writers here on the Reedsy platform. We're not going to start for a few minutes, so ease yourself in, pour yourself a drink or a cup of coffee or tea, depending what time of day it is for you, and let us know in the comments where you're coming from today, and if indeed you are a participant in the Reedsy Prompts contest. If you don't know what that is, you'll find out very soon. Let us know if you are a regular participant, an every now and again participant, or maybe someone who just lurks around in a nice way and reads the great stories that come on our site every week. We have Trudy from Cincinnati, who's excited to be here. Cameron congratulates Reedsy to all his members who did this. Congratulations. Who else have we got here? Kerry from League City, Texas. Joy from San Antonio, Texas. Texas is pretty well represented today, turns out. But glad to have you all here. Cal Mitt says they are a lurker. But hey, always glad to have a lurker. Someone's got to read these. We have Dali. It is 2 a.m. in Indonesia. Well, selamat datang, welcome. Glad you could be here. Shirley from London, UK. That is indeed where I am and where my co-host Laura is right now. We have Brack Hammers from Lancaster in the UK, new to the prompts community. Hopefully you get a taste for it today, and you might take part in future ones, and your story might be featured in an upcoming volume of Prompted magazine. We have Mary Beth McGee from Poplarville, Mississippi. Cassie from the tiny town of Edam, Texas. More Texans. Stockwell Santley from West London. Melvin from the Philippines. Mabuhay. We have Arlene from Tampa. Cameron comes from the USA. Abby is their first time here. Excited to listen and learn from Maryland. We have Omon from Nigeria. Fantastic. Jamie from Cambridgeshire. Juanita from Chile. Leslie from Cherryville, North Carolina. It is apparently cloudy, but hot. And that has been your weather update from North Carolina. Shane from Northeast Kansas. We have Erna from Buenos Aires. Denise from Jamaica, a regular viewer here on Reedsy Live. Glad to see you here, Denise. Every now and again, she enters the contest, but life gets in the way of writings. Amen. Isn't that always the case? Daisy from Pakistan. Susan from Congleton in Cheshire. Wow. And we have Bonnie from Loudon, Tennessee. Great to see so many people from so many places. We have a little like button on the video here. If you could be so kind. I know you haven't seen much yet to particularly like, but if you give us a thumbs up, that will help us a lot to get the word out and maybe get some more people joining this live stream. I'm glad to see so many of you here already. But I'm noticing that it is now 8 o'clock where I am, which means it's something like 3 p.m. on the East Coast, midday on the West Coast. I think 1 or 2 in the central time zones where some of our guests are. And if you're in Australia, it's probably like 5 or 6. I'm so glad you can join us while I bring on my co-host for this event, who truly is the actual host. She is the editor-in-chief of Prompted magazine, a beloved member of the Reedsy team, and a participant and completionist of the 2024 London Marathon. Laura Kerridge. Laura, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Martin. Thank you for bringing that up so that I don't have to do it myself.
I know you would have wedged that into conversation no matter what.
Naturally.
But yeah, thank you for joining us for this one and for putting together this launch party. Before we bring everyone on, could you just give us a quick rundown about what Prompted is, and what we can expect from today?
Of course, yes. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I know that some people may not be that familiar with prompts and prompters, so as Martin mentioned, I'll give a little rundown so that you're all up to speed. before we get into our readings. So yes, my name's Laura. I'm part of the Reedsy team and I am the Prompts host. So Prompts is our weekly short story contest. It's been running now for, I think we've had 400 competitions. We just cracked that mark. So it's been going for a long time now, and it's grown into an amazing community. The concept is pretty simple and it's stayed the same. Every single week, we are sending you a newsletter with one theme and 5 short story writing prompts based off of that theme. And we invite authors to write a story based on those 5 prompts. You have 7 days to write the story, which is not a lot of time, but I'm always absolutely amazed by the creativity and how prolific our authors are. So yeah, it can be any genre. 1,000 to 3,000 words, and the winner each week wins $250. Sometimes we have some special prizes. We might have a guest judge who can give you some feedback. You might win a scholarship to our writing course. But yeah, always $250, and the chance to be featured in Prompted, which is what we're all here to celebrate today. Prompted is our new magazine we launched last year. And essentially Prompted is a collection of some of our favourite recent stories, stories that have really stuck with us. And we wanted to find a way to work with our authors a little bit more directly, give people who maybe haven't published before the opportunity to publish, and also work with some people who have. And yeah, it's just a celebration of this really cool community, everyone's creativity, and a chance to read some really good stories. So yeah, today is the day that we launched the 3rd issue, and it is now available to download for free. You can also buy it in print copy if you're into that. Personally, I'm into. Yeah, it's out everywhere now. Sorry, Martin. I think there's a little.
We have a link in the description below, so if you expand that, you can get a link to Amazon. You may have to navigate to your local Amazon store, so that one links you to the US one. Whichever one you get your books from, you could just search for Prompted Volume 3 or Prompted, and ideally it should turn up. Cool. So Laura, what's just to sort of tease the events of today, what can we expect from our little launch party?
Well, we're going to hear from 3 of our authors who have very kindly agreed to join us. They're going to read to us from their stories, and then we're just going to have a little bit of a chat about their stories, about their writing process, all things short fiction. So yeah, we've got some really nice extracts ready for you. And if you hang around to the end, we're going to have a little Q&A. So if you have any burning questions about Prompted, questions for the authors, stick around for that and we'll be answering some of those. And you also, I believe, Martin, are in with a chance of winning a free copy if you stick around to the end.
I think we can stretch our coffers to give away 3 printed copies. So stick around to the end. We'll have a little on the spot contest. That'll be very easy, so just stick around for that. Cool. All right. Do you want to kick things off?
Yes. Okay, sorry, just one thing, Martin. I think there's a little, I don't know if it's just me, but there might be a little background crackle noise. I don't know what it is.
It could be coming from you, maybe? Are you?
Perhaps it's coming from me. I'm sorry, everyone, if there's background crackle. Do let me know. But we'll carry on and we'll see. Yeah, so I think it's time we can get into some of our excerpts now. We can meet some of our authors, which I'm very excited about. So first up in our running, we have Bay. Bay, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. How about you?
Good, thank you. Do you want to let people know a little bit about yourself, where you're joining from, and then we can get into your extract?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Bay. I use they, them pronouns. I'll be a college sophomore in the fall, which is 2nd year for non-Americans. I'm majoring in religious studies with the intentions of eventually going into library science and becoming a librarian. I've been writing pretty consistently since I was about 8, so like over a decade now, and writing is really my whole life. So, whenever I'm not studying or taking care of chores or whatever, I'm always writing or reading. And, when I was a little kid, instead of being grounded from electronics, it was being grounded from books, if that tells you anything about me. And Reedsy has been a really awesome resource for me in that regard over the years. This story was the first one I ever submitted to the weekly contest, but I'd been using your guys' manuscript tool for a long time before that. So yeah, I'm familiar, even if this is my first time being directly involved. So really glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, that's really nice to know that you've been using our stuff for a while. Whenever you're ready, if you want to get into your extract, let people know what prompt your story was based on. Yeah, this is Clearance Aisle Libations.
Yes. So my prompt was write a story about someone trying to raise the dead. Okay. The worst part about being an amateur necromancer is that no one respects you, not even the dead. My older brother Joseph is practically crying over the phone, struggling to speak through great gasps of heaving, wheezing laughter. After way too many seconds of this, he finally manages to choke out, "Really? Dead serious? Mountain Dew?" Irritated, I switch my phone to my other ear, tipping my head awkwardly to pin it in place while I free up my hands for my shovel. It was the only drink left on clearance. Joseph makes a thin, stifled little sound that only darkens my frown. You seriously went to the clearance aisle to buy libations? Where? No, wait, let me guess. Dollar Tree. Wait, no. 7-Eleven. Family Dollar. Tell me if I'm getting warmer. You're hypothermic. Walmart. Joseph howls. Walmart. Freaking Walmart. Oh my God. Ignoring his idiotic guffawing and tucking the shovel into the crook of my elbow, I begin to haul the rest of my supplies out of the bed of my truck, a heavy duffel bag containing everything I managed to scrounge up around the house. In the driver's seat, a pale skeletal head leans out of the window, glancing back at me. "Do you need any help, Laurel?" the family chauffeur asks kindly. He used to be a relative, I think. Several generations removed and raised sometime in the early 19th century. A great grandfather of a sort. Since then, he seemed relatively content to drive us all around in perpetuity, despite our best efforts to convince him to be laid to rest again. "No, thank you, Marco," I say. I don't want to exploit his aging skeleton beyond his chauffeuring, and he is a shockingly sharp chauffeur. "Hey, is Marco there? Tell him I said hi. Lore, tell him I said..." I pry the phone away from my face and say, "Joseph says hi, Marco." "Oh, well," Marco says, bashful. The exact mechanics of his speech are a mystery to me. The man is only bones. Of course I'm always happy to hear from Joseph. "He says you're a pathetic, gibbering moron, Joe," I say into the speaker, and Joseph instantly starts in with his loud protestations, which, like, I don't really care. I let him finish his tirade, not registering any of the airheaded words, before continuing, "And I don't appreciate you constantly belittling me. Just because I wasn't born with the talent doesn't mean I'm not skilled in my own right. Look, Lore, I'm just saying that if you want people to take you seriously, you gotta stop buying Walmart libations and start investing in something that'll, actually take you somewhere." "I can't afford," Joseph groans. "Maybe it's a sign that necromancy just isn't in the cards, you precious baby magician. Remember what Auntie Gertrude said before Ma laid her back down? In both life and death, I was frequently of the opinion that Aunt Gertrude should mind her own petty, squalling business."
Thank you. Thank you for reading that for us.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a really funny story. I would highly recommend everyone check it out. I mean, with all of these stories that we're going to hit today, I'd really highly recommend that everyone checks them out. But one of the reasons that we selected this story in particular for the anthology is because in the prompts contest, us judges, we absolutely love getting genre fiction, fantasy, horror, sci-fi, and it's not actually as common as you would think. I think maybe because of the short form, people can kind of be a little bit put off because there are kind of different constrictions or conventions with genre fiction in terms of world building and stuff like that. So whenever we have a bit of genre fiction that's done really well, we're really happy, and especially funny genre fiction. So yeah, I think you really nailed it with this one. The story is definitely one of the funniest ones in the collection. And I really enjoy how sort of well observed and realistic the kind of character dynamics are, because even though this is sort of patently a very absurd situation,
Mhm.
it feels very realistic. You know, it's a fantastical story, but that interaction is still, I think, quite relatable, especially to anyone who has siblings such as myself. So I kind of wondered where the inspiration for these characters came from, and were they sort of your starting point, or is your main character your starting point? And yeah, where you sort of draw your characters from in general when you're writing, because I think that's something that a lot of people are very curious about.
Yeah, this story was actually a bit of an aberration for me in that normally when I start a story, I start with a core aesthetic or a theme to shape the plot and the characters around. But in this case, I was immediately seized by the character voice that I wanted to steer this story. From the very beginning, Laurel had this very pretentious, desperately insecure bite that I knew I wanted to develop, and the story kind of unfolded from there. And more often than not, I tend to discover characters as I go along. I avoid preliminary scripting as much as possible when I start writing something new because I want to discover the story organically as I go along. And if I plan too much or write too many details from the get go, my brain flips a little switch and says, "This is finished, no need to actually write the story." And I hate feeling the inspiration die from that. So my characters, my plots, my world building, they're all as much as an adventure for me as they are for you. Once you've been, I think, submersed in a lot of different kinds of storytelling for long enough, you kind of internalize the conventions to a point where it all feels like spontaneous or like it isn't really intentional, but it is. It's just so intuitive at this point that I no longer think about the specific mechanics of character creation anymore. It's just one of those things that comes from a lot of practice.
Hmm. That's well. I'm guessing I know what your answer is for my next question, but I'm very curious. Um, Speaking of characters, your story and its characters were selected as our cover story for this issue. So our very brilliant illustrator Raoul Gill, put together an illustration inspired by your story, and we like to keep those illustrations kind of as a surprise for our authors. So we can't really ask them very many questions about sort of what a character might look like, or anything like that. So I'm guessing, considering it sounds like you're more of a pantser and you don't
Mhm.
necessarily plan things out, that you probably didn't go through the process of doing like a character questionnaire or a character profile
Mhm.
ahead of time. But I did wonder what it's like seeing a visualization of your story in that way. If it did marry with what you had maybe imagined aesthetically for your characters, or whether it was completely different. Yeah. And I'm just curious about that whole experience, really.
Mhm. Yeah, it was super cool to get to see how the cover artist interpreted Laurel and Marco, especially because the actual descriptions of their appearances were really vague. Not necessarily on purpose, but it was interesting nonetheless to see where like my imagination diverged from it because of that ambiguity. Like for Marco, I was picturing more skeleton, while the cover went more zombie, and I thought that was really fun. And I was picturing Laurel as a bit more nondescript, brown hair, brown eyes, plain clothes, forgettable features. But the cover imagines her as having a lot more of a striking visual presence, which was really, really cool. When it comes to the like appearances of my characters in general, sometimes I have a very clear, crisp image of what a character looks like, their mannerisms, their gender presentation, and other times I'm not quite as attached to a character's visuals as I am to like their personality or to their like thematic role. And this is really based on nothing but like my own creative whims or whatever. And so um, I just like to lean harder on the ambiguity of descriptions sometimes, and then sometimes I'm a little more passionate about what characters are meant to look like. But in general, I'm a huge fan of ambiguity, and so a lot of my stories tend to be pretty ambiguous about appearance.
Hmm. I'm also, besides your characters, I'm also very interested in your dialogue, because it reads very naturally and it is very funny. And doing those two things, I mean, either one of those things is very difficult. To do them both at the same time is extremely difficult. So I wondered if you kind of had any tips for us in terms of where you begin when you're trying to put together your dialogue, if you're drawing from real life or if it's kind of something a little bit more nebulous. And any tips that you have for trying to write funny dialogue would be much appreciated.
So I grew up in a very acerbic, very witty family where like clever humor is kind of like the main love language. And so a lot of my dialogue is not exactly real life conversations, but definitely in the tradition of how I tend to speak on a daily basis, I think. And I owe practically all of my humor to my parents and my grandparents who are all well versed in the art of verbal sparring. And that is definitely reflected in my writing. And the stronger a grasp that I have on a character's voice intuitively from the outset, I think the easier it is for me to get into that rhythm of that natural banter. But I would say that it's fairly consistent across like my different stories because it's just a narratively fine-tuned distillation of how I normally articulate myself. So either during like regular everyday interactions or how I'm committing to some bit with my friends. So like really I think that my main tip for writing genuinely funny, charming dialogue is to hang hang out with really funny, genuinely charming people, because you can fall into this groove of like hilarious, smart conversation, and then it becomes something that you internalize in your writing.
So, do you? I'm just curious if you ever read it aloud. Is that part of your process, or is it all pretty internal?
It's all pretty internal, I think. It goes in hand, I think, with how I tend to discover characters and stories as I go along. I tend to feel as though characters are just talking and I'm just like transcribing. It feels less like something that I'm crafting and more like something that they're speaking through me, which sounds so pretentious, but um, yeah, yeah, it does feel like a transcription and less of like something that I'm creating, I think.
I'm sure a lot of people are very jealous of that. I'm very jealous of that because I find it to be quite hard work. But yeah, no, that's really interesting to hear. Thank you for sharing that. I also, again, speaking of humor, it's obviously a funny story, but you do actually explore some kind of darker themes, but in quite a playful way. So obviously, beside like the macabre element of a necromancer,
Mhm.
there's sort of the real life kind of emotional issues that will probably be quite relatable in terms of like familial expectation and identity, because Laurel is the only one in her family who doesn't have that gift naturally, and has quite a lot of angst related to that. Um,
Mhm.
so I just wondered if that is something that you often do in terms of trying to sort of find humour in those sort of darker emotions, or sort of playing out sort of relatable psychological concerns in a more absurd way. Is that something that you like playing with?
Yes, absolutely. I've been jokingly accused of being incapable of committing to just one genre for that very reason. Humor tends to find its way into anything that I write, and it's become a real staple of my style. And then on the flip side, also, I can't write straight comedy either without injecting it with some emotional weight, because I've found that the funniest stories are the ones that are grounded very firmly in emotional realities that people can connect to and feel seen by. And so, like in this story, it's an absurd premise. You know, Laurel is not a necromancer, but wants to be one very badly. Except she's not nearly as sophisticated as she'd like to be, so she performs her dark, macabre rituals with Mountain Dew from the clearance aisle. And like, there's a clear and deliberate tension between Laurel's self-awareness about how ridiculous it is, and her very earnest desperation to be taken seriously despite it. And so, a lot of my stories are very concerned with that tension, self-conscious absurdity versus a very real heartfelt inability to succumb to nihilism or apathy because of it. And it's a theme that's kind of important to me on a personal level, how difficult it is to walk the line of being both excruciatingly aware of just how weird this existence is, while also embracing it, loving it, and engaging with it as authentically as you can. It's kind of the thesis of my whole life right there.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, reading to us, and letting us a little bit into your process. So thank you very much, Bay.
Thank you.
I think now we may transition to our next author. So, Parl, how are you doing?
Hi, wonderful. Thank you.
Hi. Maybe like Bay, do you want to maybe give a little bit of insight into who you are for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. My name is Parl, and I am in Houston, Texas. Um, I was brought up in the States. I'm an Indian American, first generation, and often we call ourselves Desi, which I use that term in my story. Um, I was an advertising copywriter for a little over a decade, and never deigned to consider myself a real writer. I was an ad writer. And it just felt like a really big thing to proclaim yourself a writer. And it was during COVID that I started writing not creative nonfiction. And then last year, I was a little bored with writing the nonfiction and wanted to do something different. And so, sort of as a birthday dare, I had just learned about Reedsy and I'd never written fiction. And as a dare to myself to do something scary because I'm in my 50s and that's what we do, um, I decided to try a prompt on Reedsy and kind of tiptoe into the water of creative fiction, get hidden, buried with hundreds of other stories on top of mine. So no one would know that I'm calling myself a writer.
unfortunately, you got found out because we found your story and we loved your story. And I'm very glad that you've taken the plunge into fiction because, yeah, I'm a great fan of your writing. Speaking of which, perhaps you would like to read to us now. So this is from Shameless.
Yes. So the prompt is write about a character in a situation where they have to be brave for someone else's sake. Most aunties in A-Leaf didn't work outside the house, but half of them ran a side hustle from their home. There were several other aunties running mini catering businesses like my mom. One or two had some kind of jewelry shop because their family.
Okay, I believe this is resuming. Hello. Okay. Allegedly, this is resuming. Give me a second while I can confirm that. Okay. Now, yeah, we've had some issues here. Perry is yet to join. If you are listening there at home, may I ask you, what is the last thing that you've heard? Because I'm not exactly where you stopped. Is it with chatting with Bay, or had Parl started reading her story yet? Okay, Stockwell said, can't get further because their family were in India. If this is all right, I might ask Parl to start her story again, and hopefully we can all pick up from there. Okay. They mentioned from the jewelry shop. If we all are okay, okay, I'll throw this back to Parl. Oh. Hello. Yep, we are all back online right now. Let me throw this to Parl. If you kindly, if you don't mind, starting again.
Sure. Most aunties in A-Leaf didn't work outside the house, but half of them ran a side hustle from their home. There were several other aunties running mini catering businesses like my mom. One or two had some kind of jewelry shop because their family in India were in the business. You could spot which ones sold gold or diamonds because they had metal bars on their windows and doors. Of course, not everyone who had caged their houses were brown jewelry dealers. Some were scared white people who hadn't yet moved to Sugarland or Katy, those emerging suburbs with less crime and fewer brown people. A handful of the more self assured aunties had secured real estate licenses and begun catering to Desi clientele who were also moving to Sugarland or Katy. Then there was an auntie who ran an unlicensed beauty salon in her guest bedroom, threading eyebrows and female mustaches. Bikini waxes weren't a thing, at least not officially, because nobody would go to a fellow Desi to get it done. Hell, just shaving your legs was a confession of interest in attracting the opposite sex, which was a super terrible interest to have. Besharam, shameless, the aunties would cluck judgmentally at Hindi movie actresses wearing shorts and tube tops. But I heard some daisies living here in A-Leaf got more than their arms waxed, and I thought how they must be absolutely fearless to be so Besharam. I secretly admired the beautician auntie who served the Besharam among us, quietly and without judgment, tending to whatever a woman needed done in order to feel good. I wished my mom was a beautician doing modern American things instead of a cook making desi food, as if we were all still in India. My mom had lugged two oversized, overweight bags stuffed with jumbo stainless steel pots and masala from India in order to cook authentic nasta, snacks, and typically Guju food like dal and damita badaka shak for people's parties. Before going to India to visit her parents, she had fresh red chilies, ajwain, cinnamon, cardamom, black pepper, and other seeds and pods delivered to my grandparents' rooftop back in Valsard so they could roast under the sun for a week. When she arrived, she called three women over for 2 days to ground all the masala using a giant stone mortar and pestle. She sat up there on the baking hot rooftop to supervise them, nitpicking about every little thing. I'd never seen my mom be the boss of anyone, so this was interesting. Back in Houston, she exhibited a healthy fear of authority figures, and a lot of people fell into this category. White people in general, police, security guards, teachers, doctors, receptionists, and grocery store clerks were seen as people to be obeyed. But for her masala, she scaled her wall of fear and straight up lied to the U.S. Customs officer and said, "We didn't have any uncooked agricultural products in our luggage." I wasn't sure if the spices counted, but I knew for sure the roots of a half dozen desi veggies we had wrapped intact with some good desi soil was definitely uncooked. So I had tugged at her sari to remind her about that, to which she responded by stomping on my foot.
Thank you so much, Parl, and also thank you for bearing with the technical difficulties. I'm glad that you restarted and that everyone could hear every word because, yeah, I think there's so much to unpack in this story, and it was actually a real struggle to pick an extract, where to take the extract from, because it is a really rich story. There's kind of something to unpack in every section, and I think every bit of description kind of teaches us a lot about your narrator and her mother and this world that they inhabit, and yeah, a really clear sort of sense of place and community, and it was such an interesting story. So thank you so much for reading to us from it. I guess I kind of wanted to start because this is quite a broad prompt. So I wondered what made you gravitate towards telling this particular story.
I think I always gravitate towards unsung heroes. I love the stories of ordinary people who rise to the occasion, and I think I mean, this was my first stab at writing fiction, so they say write what you know, and what I know is the story of so many immigrants and the heroisms, everyday valor that I've witnessed. So I thought I'd touch on that. And really, in the past, it's only kind of recently, I think, in the US that the Indian American experience is being shared in pop culture. And, there are a lot of there's one show in particular that has had huge success called Never Have I Ever. And all of my non-Indian friends always say, "Oh, I always think of you when I see that show, and it's so wonderful." And it is a wonderfully entertaining show in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I kind of find myself feeling like, "Gosh, that's not that's not my story. That's not the story of people that I grew up with. My fellow Desi friends." So I wanted to write my version of that Indian American growing up experience.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. It's always such a pleasure also to get to read own voices fiction. So yeah, thank you for sharing it with us. I sort of had a question about your style and your craft, something that kind of really struck me when I first read the story, and kind of as I've reread it over the process of putting this magazine out. And it's about your use of description. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent, a little monologue here, because I've got a lot to say about it. I find it really interesting. The way that you use description in your writing. So I think especially when we're sort of talking about short fiction, there's this kind of impulse. I think a lot of authors are real sticklers for wanting every single paragraph to drive forward some kind of action in quite like a tangible way. I think because of sort of, the if you're writing 1,000 to 3,000 words and you want something to happen in that time, you need to make sure that it happens. But I find it really interesting and really nice. Nice is not a good enough word. I find it beautiful in your story that you're quite happy to sort of linger in description, and you're happy to give us a lot of details and a sense of history, family history, local history, and you had a lot of depth to your character's world. And that means that we don't even really sort of hit the main conflict, the sort of plot of the story until halfway. If you're thinking of things in a traditional sense of plot and conflict and what all those words mean, which obviously is up for debate, but we don't really hit that action until about halfway through, which is quite unusual. But I think it works brilliantly, even though it kind of goes against some of the conventions that we're sort of used to. with writing advice. So I kind of wondered after my whole speech about it if that is a conscious choice for you, if or sort of how you decide when's the time to drive plot forward in that more conventional way, and when you're sort of happy to take a moment and build out. And if you have any sort of tips for how to pull off what you pulled off brilliantly of making quite a description heavy story feel dynamic and not like a static portrait, but like something is still happening even if we're not kind of going through a linear ABC plot development, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I'd masterminded it and I knew exactly what I was doing, but the reality is I had no idea what I was doing. So, um, but I mean, I knew that the context was very important, and I wanted to set that up. And quite honestly, when I write, whether it's nonfiction or with fiction, it's the path of discovery. So I'm I'm going through the story with the reader, really discovering what happens and what's important. Um, and I think that in retrospect, I mean, well, the context was so important because it's almost a character, and I needed to set that up. Because if we didn't know all this about the neighborhood and about her life, then you don't really have the tension that she experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So that was introduction to the character of the context.
Mm-hmm. I wonder also whether do you feel that because this is sort of a story that borrows from your own experiences, whether that's part of how that kind of it can flow out so fully formed, because it really does feel like you are in this place. It's brilliantly done.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I was kind of romancing myself into the space of the story with first getting into that landscape. I did not grow up in that neighborhood, but I know many people who did, and I visited it many times. Um, and it was a little trip down memory lane to get myself in that headspace before things start happening.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought us along for it because it was very enjoyable. Um, Another thing that is very present in your story is food. And I really enjoy writing about food. It's very present both in a literal sense in the plot, but also it's clearly very significant to your characters, to the narrator and her mother, in terms of like a material connection to culture, and the different ways that they engage with that. I wondered if that was something that you reflect on a lot, or what made you decide to sort of hang your story around food this time?
Yeah, I realized that we Daisy kids, we've assimilated in many ways brilliantly. I can talk with a Texan accent if I need to. I can dress and behave in many ways like an American. But when it comes to food, we need our Desi food from time to time. It's kind of a non-negotiable. And I had, like many immigrant children, I had that lunchbox moment, which I think is almost like a defined term at this point, where I'd taken a chutney sandwich to school and got kind of bullied for it, like, "Ew, she's eating green slime." And in that moment, I was so full of shame for my food, which I loved, and I didn't eat the rest of it. And also full of shame for being embarrassed about my food. And so this story was an opportunity to kind of provide some compassion to that person I was, um, with all the shame around food, which was so core, so central to my identity, really.
I think those themes obviously come across beautifully, and I think you did a wonderful job exploring them. So thank you again for plucking up the courage and submitting, because it was such a treat. And thank you for reading to us from your story.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to hear from our third and final author now. Perry, you there? Hi.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Can hear you very well, thank you. And thank
Okay.
you also for going to the above and beyond by joining from your holiday and making
Well,
the
thank
time to
you.
join us. It's very kind of you. And I'm very excited. I'm very excited for everyone to hear from your story. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself as a writer
Yeah,
or anything about you?
yeah, sure. So, it's funny. I feel like my story is kind of similar to Parl's. My name is Perry. I live in Los Angeles, California, and I'm a practicing obstetrician gynecologist. I've written nonfiction in the past and some creative nonfiction surrounding women's health issues, but I always had an interest in writing fiction, but I never really tried it or kind of pushed myself to do it until about a year ago, and that's what led me to Reedsy. And I was like, well, let me just at least see if I can do it in order to know if that's something that I want to like further pursue. And I did a couple of the prompts, and I think this was the second one. And then I won the contest. And besides just winning the contest, just having the feedback, I think from the rest of the community and the readers and stuff was really inspiring for me. And just having that interaction, and then finding other, like, even from people commenting and then going and reading their stories, I think was really inspiring. So I'm very appreciative that I found Reedsy and that I'm here.
It's always, I said this the last time that we have on these webinars, I really enjoy finding out what brought people to Reedsy. And I also enjoy that I believe it might be the case for all of you that either on your first or very early submissions that you won. I always find that incredibly cool. And yeah, thank you for joining us at Reedsy and for sharing your writing with us. Perhaps you'd like to go into your extract now. So this is from Lily's.
Yes. So my uh, prompt, let's see. Okay. So my prompt was, start your story with your character or characters going to buy some flowers. Okay. So my excerpt. Do they come with a card? I asked the florist solemnly, a petite tan woman with thick blonde hair cascading down her back. The kind of hair that has become popular for women half her age to have threaded and sewn onto the base of their skull. Even though we were in West Hollywood, the pulsing heart of glamour, the three untouched horizontal lines etched on her forehead told me that she had passed by the fancy salons lined up around the corner on Santa Monica Boulevard, perhaps never to even wonder who was inside. I, on the other hand, was a regular at one of those salons. There are doctors that live and breathe medicine, the true scholars, the scientists who wake up on a Sunday morning, configure a beaker and a Graham scale to make their pour over, and then sit on their patio at sunrise, reading the latest medical research in the Journal of the American Medical Association. But I wasn't one of those. In my third year of medical school, the year that I began my clinical rotations, I started a different narrative for myself. I began to pride myself on being more well-rounded than the kids whose identity rested on being a future physician. On occasion, I would slip away to parties filled with graduate business students from the nearby university, and not so slyly signal that although I was soon to be a doctor, I was more than that. I would chat about the latest Desperate Housewives episode, fling my hair like Beyonce while dancing a Crazy in Love, and never mention that I had spent the whole day reading about how the kidney regulates plasma osmolarity. When specifically asked what I didn't lie like my friend Molly did. I just didn't volunteer the information. Molly would say that she worked at Express. She said that guys were no longer interested in her when she mentioned that she was in medical school. I found that to be ridiculous. I would never hide who I was for a man. Even now, a full decade later, after spending an entire evening talking to a man and failing to mention what I do, it isn't for him. Yes, it says my deepest sympathies, she responded, her weathered hand passing me the 4 by 2 inch paper that accompanied the basket of white flowers. I always thought it fascinating that lilies are believed to represent rebirth and purity, yet are often found at funerals. Such opposition within one flower. Okay, great. Can I also borrow a pen? I asked. I was unprepared for today in more ways than one.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's another really beautiful story, and it's quite a difficult story. I think a lot of the themes, and I think when I read your author bio, and I learned that this is, again, something that is kind of drawn from your experience, your professional experience. It just made perfect sense, because I thought this, I mean, not that people can't write things that they don't know, but just everything was so well observed, and yeah, it really reflected in your writing, and that this is a subject matter that you know and that you care very deeply about. So yeah, thank you for sharing it with us and for reading to us from it today. Speaking, yes, of kind of your background and the fact that you yourself are an OBGYN, clearly it obviously influences your stories in terms of subject matter. And I wanted to ask what that's like exploring those real world experiences, especially quite difficult ones. This story deals with, some very difficult themes. What it's like exploring that through fiction, and what maybe led you to do so, if you'd be happy sharing that with us. But I'm also curious if you think that being a doctor perhaps has influenced your writing in other ways beyond subject matter.
Yeah, I think I'll answer that question first. I do think obviously there's the subject matter there, and being a physician, I guess this kind of answers both questions in a way. It's like being a physician, especially an OBGYN, we have this kind of intimate look into people's lives. We're there for the best times in their lives, we're there for the worst times in their lives, and we get to know intimately the relationships that they have, what their backgrounds may be, what their difficulties may be in life. And I think that, I've been really inspired lately to share those stories, especially of women, some of these stories that are not as spoken about, especially right now. In America, we're having some challenges surrounding reproductive health and these issues. And I just think it's really important to share these stories, to educate people, to almost use fiction as a way to educate people and have people connect with women's health, reproductive health, and some of the different challenges that people may face. I think being a physician and getting to know about that stuff on a deeper level, intimate level, really sets me up for good character development, because you have this kind of intricate look into someone's lives, intimate look. And I think there's the empathy component, right? I think all writers have to be empathetic if they're going to be able to put themselves in someone else's shoes and write someone else's story. And I think as a physician, most of us also have, a great deal of empathy. That's why we went into the career that we went into, was to help people and understand people. So I think there's overlap there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I really appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, I think the effect is very powerful, and this is a powerful story. So yeah, thank you again for sharing it. I keep saying that, but I do really truly appreciate, especially when people are kind of drawing on their own experiences when they share them with us. So thank you. Kind of moving away from subject matter, I have another crafty question. So I'm so long-winded when I give these, but I'm just really interested in people's style, and specifically your structure, because kind of like Parl's, it's not a straightforward linear narrative. So we jump around a bit in terms of timeline. We have a framing scene in the flower shop, but as your main character is kind of making associations with memories, we're moving back and forth. We're seeing some history of this kind of friendship relationship that develops between her and a patient. But we're still always coming back to that flower shop and moving around. And it's a pretty tough thing, I think, to pull off, to keep forward momentum and to not have people being like, where am I all of a sudden? I think you do it brilliantly. So I wondered if you maybe, again, if this was a conscious choice, what made you choose that narrative structure? And if you are someone who maybe like Bay as a pantser and kind of like writes things out as they come to them, or whether it's more that you're plotting these things and planning them quite meticulously. Yeah, I'd just be really curious about that. And maybe if you had any tips for writers who similarly would like to explore that kind of stream of consciousness style.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really nice feedback to hear. This story has actually inspired me to write a novel and kind of base it on this short story. And I think through that experience, I can definitely say for better or worse, I am a pantser. I have an idea kind of like of the beginning and a little bit of the end, but then I do let that flow in a short story format. I think it's maybe a little bit easier because I think now that I've kind of gotten into the longer process of a novel, it's like, well, you end up editing or kind of erasing things that then maybe aren't as pertinent in the storyline by the time that you get towards the end. But I think it's just kind of the way you are. Either you are a pantser or a plotter, and I think I kind of fall maybe a little bit in between where I have some idea, but it's not kind of perfectly outlined. I think for me coming into this, because I am a new fiction writer, I I think I had naivety on my side. I do think that if you get too technical and try to plot out too much or outline too much, you might lose some of that creativity if you are looking for kind of a stream of consciousness format. I think it's really nice to just kind of listen to yourself and let it flow. And then if something doesn't belong, you can edit it out and erase it later. And I also think for me, even though I'm a new fiction writer, I've always been a storyteller, and just in my personal life, professional life, it's just kind of who I am. And I think when writing, a way that I kind of follow it is similar to if I was telling a story in person, right? You want to give someone context, you want to give them a little bit of background, but you don't want to go so far deep into that now you're off on another tangent and the audience is like, well, where are we? Like, what are we talking about, right? So it's that same idea. It's just kind of imagining like the reader is an audience member. It's someone you're talking to in a way. So kind of keeping that same thing of like giving someone context, details, setting the story, but then bringing it back to the story before that, escapes and kind of runs wild with its own thing. If that makes sense.
It does. And when you mention that, you're completely right that is well, maybe I'm more prone to tangents than the average person, but when I'm telling a story to my friends, it's absolutely true that it's so associative and you realize, oh, I need to explain this, and then you pop back into the main narrative. So yeah, and it's really well executed in your story. So that's very interesting to hear. Also, speaking of process, now that I've established, I guess everyone's pantsers around here. I wouldn't say I identify as a pantser, but you're inspiring me that maybe I need to let my writing flow a little more. But in terms of the very beginning of writing, so with this prompt, the someone buying flowers prompt, it was quite deliberately a dual prompt. We enjoy doing that where I like when a prompt could really go either way, depending on the way that you're looking at it, the day that you're looking at it, the mood you're in, whatever. So obviously flowers can either be quite joyful, a celebratory thing, or showing condolences, kind of as you mentioned in the story. And obviously you chose one particular path. I wondered kind of how that decision happened, if it's quite instantaneous, if you knew straight away that was the story that you wanted to write. And also just sort of generally how you work with writing prompts as an exercise. So if it's a case of you will look around until you find a prompt that speaks to something that you want to say, or whether you're someone who's a little bit more, the exercise is taking the prompt and making it work regardless, even if it's not something that immediately comes to mind. So yeah, just curious about your kind of approach to prompts in general.
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. I think that's what's kind of nice about, the Reedsy prompts is you guys in 1 week give many options, right? And so it's not necessarily that I have a story and then I try to find a prompt that like fits it. Not at all. That I let the prompt be the inspiration. With that said, I still look at several prompts and then kind of see which one is calling to me. I know that sounds a little foo-foo, but just kind of which one is kind of calling to me. And then from there, or which one kind of resonates. I know myself, like when I write, I do write more kind of dramatic, emotional stories. And so like which one would maybe fit that? I probably wouldn't be drawn to kind of a sci-fi or a genre bending. So I think there are those guardrails of which one could kind of fit my version of storytelling, but then I let the prompt inspire me. And this one particularly, I think it's totally what you said. It's like, where are you in that day? I can't say, but for this one, when I thought of the flowers, I immediately was called to a more kind of like sympathetic version of flowers than a celebratory one. But I do think that I did draw on that dual nature as well. I have that line in there where I say, oh, it's always been interesting to me that this is a, nice, flower, and then it's there for funerals. And then for me, for the main character of the story, the doctor, I try to infuse that in her as well. She kind of has this dual component where she's trying to be this like, cool person that's, outside of the practice, really isn't involved with her patients as much, has these kind of like other aspects of her where she's going to this like cool salon and, listens to Beyonce and says that she's always been kind of separate than her other more, I guess, academic classmates. But then ultimately, like in the story, you see that besides that, she can't help it. She gets involved with the patient. She does have the softer side to her. And so I think I was trying to draw on that dual nature as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much again for joining and for answering my questions. And I think since we're kind of speaking about prompts generally, maybe it is time for us to open the floor. And maybe Martin can give us some audience questions if we're up for that.
Yeah, if everyone would like to put in a question, we can put it to everyone. Also, at the same time, we are giving away 3 printed copies of Prompted, which includes this lovely cover inspired by Bay's, pointing the wrong way, Bay's story. So if you wish to put yourself in the running for a free copy, which we'll send to you, a lovely printed edition, just type in the comments the word flowers. Type in flowers, and then I can sort of filter for that and we'll pick some winners. But also, if you have any questions for our gang here, do also throw those in. We'll ask those in just a minute. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, Sandra's got a question here. Here we go. Asking, what is peri-genre? Would you say that when you were writing that you sort of were thinking along generic terms?
Yeah, I think I would categorize it as, women's fiction, dramatic fiction, somewhere in there, and that tends to be what my genre is.
Does it tend to reflect the sort of stuff you like to read as well?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that always
I read
helps.
those. Yeah.
I think this is one of the things about the contest that is difficult, is that we do ask people to tag things as a specific genre, but it can be so difficult to nail down what a short story is. And yeah, we do have a lot of sort of quite literary short stories, dramatic short stories that I'm not sure that we've perfected our tags for. So maybe we need to figure that out.
Well, a lot of people are entering themselves into this contest. Oh, Cameron's got a question. Also put in flowers there. To all the authors, what is your favorite book? It's like asking to pick, I suppose, like, what is your favorite book right now? First knee-jerk reaction. Bay, when you ask this question, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I think that my favorite book is probably The Secret History by Donna Tartt. It has been for a very long time, actually. It's one of those that like hits your top spot and then it doesn't move for a really long time just because it had such like a visceral impact on me. Really fantastic book.
Parl? Oh, just wait. You're muted right now. Sorry. Go for it.
Okay, yeah, that's a really difficult question, but I'll just go with one of my most recent reads, The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. So brilliant, so many levels, so rich. There's history, there's culture, there's psychology, there's so much depth to it. I mean, it's beyond what I think I could ever aspire to do.
I'll have to check that out. Perry, you've had the most time to think.
Yeah, and that didn't help. I don't know if I can say my favorite book of all time. I'll say I recently read The Women by Kristen Hanna, and I will say that moved really up to the short list very quickly. In terms of women's fiction and historical fiction, I think she does a wonderful job of setting a story and doing world building, and then also building deep, complex characters.
Cool. Laura, might as well ask you as well. What is your favorite?
Well, all-time favorite is The We Three Men by Terry Pratchett, because I am, at my core, a fantasy nerd. But recent favorite, I recently read On Chesil Beach by Ian McEwan, and I very much enjoyed that. I enjoy something that kind of plays around with narrative structure in that way, and it's a really beautiful book.
Okay, we've got a question here from Rosalia Whitaker. I apologize for the pronunciation. Have you ever struggled with how your main character changes personalities mid-stories? And have you had to rethink everything? I guess maybe it's not so much of a disaster when you're writing something that's only 1,000 or 2,000 words long. But in longer pieces, I can imagine that's something that's tougher to unpick. Parl, I've noticed you may be nodding a bit. Is that something you found in the past?
Yeah, actually, in writing this story that I shared, Shameless, I discovered the character had a change of heart or attitude as I was writing the story, and I think, that twist, in the plot was an opening for me, and I kind of love when that happens, when someone's discovering something about themselves and allowing for change, because a stereotypical one-faceted character is not that interesting.
Cool. Unless anyone has anything to add, we have also a question here from Ronetta. Are there any ways to keep from burying my stories in detail? Bay, I suppose, like when you write in genre, I guess there's all this world building that takes place in your writing that sometimes the sort of fun of wanting to blow out all the details can, sort of hamper any forward progress. Is that something you've consciously dealt with either while writing or in the edit?
Yeah. I think that sometimes when you have a really rich world that you want to get into, it's a struggle sometimes to figure out how to insert all this information that is really important to you, but that isn't directly relevant to like what's happening in the scene or what a character would be thinking about. And so you have to find a way to balance all of this really rich detail and then with the actual like pressing concerns of the plot. And so I think it's just really important to remember that to stay focused on what characters want in each scene that they're in. And so if you know what a character wants and what they need to do to accomplish their goals, then you can sort of pad their actions with detail without inundating the story with too much, so that you always have a clear direction that you're going, while also not overwhelming your reader with too much unnecessary information.
Cool. I'm very conscious of the time right now. We're really grateful that you're all given up this hour, whether you're on holiday or your summer holiday or time off work. We have our contest going right now. A lot of people have typed flowers in, and so I've basically brought it up. I'm going to cycle through all the people and tap one to bring up as our winner. Bay, whenever you want, just shout stop. Click.
Stop.
All right, Cameron, you are our first winner. Fantastic. Cool. All right, Parl, next one here. I'm going to spin the wheel. Click.
Stop.
Barbara Mizera. And then Perry, the very last one there. I'm going to give this wheel a big old spin. Click. And the user known as Novice, okay, is the winner. So, whether you are Cameron, Barbara Mazzara, or novice, just email me, martin@reedsy.com, and I'll take it that you are who you claim to be. Give me your mailing address, and we'll have a freshly printed copy sent off to you. All right, before we wrap up, Laura, is anything you'd like to, any passing words?
Yeah, well, I just want to thank all our authors again. We do really appreciate you working with us on Prompted. It's such a pleasure, and taking the time out of your days to join us today. It's been really nice getting to hear from you and to have some real prompts people in front of my face. So I very much appreciate it, and thank you also everyone who has tuned in, anyone who's downloaded Prompted, anyone who's submitted to prompts. It's always lovely getting to do these things.
Yeah, and if you want to take part in the next contest or perhaps feature in our next edition, just go to blog.reedsy.com/contests, I want to say. What's our link?
Creative-writing-prompts, but we can put it in the description.
Or just Google Reedsy prompts, and then you'll get there. Right, cool. Well, thank you to everyone joining there. Just now, wonderful hearing authors read from their own stories. I also want to say a massive thank you to Laura, who's been doing such great work steering the ship and putting these magazines. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that this may be the last webinar we see you on. You're moving on to greener pastures at the end of next month, but you've been such a fantastic captain of the prompted vessel, and it won't be the same without you. But I believe we have lined up your successor, not your better, but your successor.
Yes, I'll introduce everyone to the next prompts host via newsletter in the next couple of months. But yeah, it's been really such a privilege to get to work on prompts and work on Prompted and speak to so many incredible authors over my time. It's been such a pleasure.
You will be missed. Thank you again for this putting this great party together. Everyone, download Volume 3 of Prompted Magazine. You won't regret it. See you all, everyone. Bye.